Jonathan Cross was a name everyone knew. At 46, he had everything most people could only dream of: money, power, and a company that led the tech world. His business, CrossTech, was the top of its game. He built it from the ground up, turning his vision into reality. But it wasn't just his company that made him famous. It was the way he ran it: calm, collected, and always in control. There was no room for mistakes, no time for distractions. He had created a life built on success, and nothing, not even his personal life, could stand in the way. His office was a reflection of who he was: clean, sharp, and efficient. No clutter, no photos of loved ones, just him, his work, and his drive to stay on top. But behind the confident businessman was a man who had sacrificed a lot. His marriage had fallen apart. He barely saw his daughter. His life was all about the next big deal, the next big project, and never slowing down. Jonathan Cross had built an empire, but the question was, at what cost? And the challenges ahead would prove that not all battles are fought in boardrooms. Some hit much closer to home. Sophia Reed was the kind of woman who didn't just stand out, she made her mark. At 28, she had the kind of drive that could move mountains. From a small town, she had worked her way up to a high position at CrossTech, known for her sharp mind and determination. She wasn't just another employee, she was someone who would do whatever it took to succeed. Her days were filled with long hours, meetings, and endless projects. But Sophia didn't mind the grind. It was the price she was willing to pay to prove she belonged in a world that often seemed reserved for those with connections, not talent. Sophia was striking, though she didn't often use her looks to get ahead. Her dark hair, neatly tied back, and her professional attire gave off an air of quiet confidence. She was focused, always several steps ahead, and knew how to make an impression without saying a word. But beneath the surface of the ambitious young woman was a person who craved more than just professional success. Sophia dreamed of something bigger, something beyond the office walls. She was determined to rise to the top, but she was also hungry for validation, something she often felt she didn't get at home or in her personal life. Sophia's path would soon cross with Jonathan Cross's in ways she never imagined, and the choices she made would change everything. Victor Cain had always lived in Jonathan Cross's shadow, but that didn't bother him. In fact, it fueled him. As the CEO of Titan Tech, a growing rival to CrossTech, Victor had spent years playing the part of the underdog. He wasn't the charming, polished figure that Jonathan was. No, Victor was grittier, more direct, and far less concerned with appearances. Where Jonathan thrived in the spotlight, Victor worked quietly in the background. He was the kind of man who didn't need recognition to know his worth. He had a sharp mind and a ruthless streak, always looking for an opportunity to strike. Victor's dark, messy hair and casual, no-frills style set him apart from Jonathan's meticulously crafted image. He didn't wear expensive suits or smile for the cameras. Instead, he spent his days strategizing, finding ways to outsmart his competition, especially Jonathan. But Victor's obsession with beating Jonathan went deeper than just business. It was personal. Years of being second best had left a bitter taste, one that Victor couldn't shake. And he knew one thing for sure: he would do anything to get ahead, even if it meant playing dirty. In the high-stakes game of tech dominance, Victor was ready to do whatever it took to make sure CrossTech wasn't the only name on everyone's lips. The battle was about to get a lot more complicated and dangerous for everyone involved. To the world, Jonathan Cross was a symbol of success, the billionaire CEO who had built a global empire from the ground up. His name was synonymous with innovation, leadership, and generosity. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a philanthropist, a visionary, a man who made headlines for his groundbreaking ideas and his deep commitment to giving back. Every year, Jonathan hosted lavish charity galas, where the richest and most powerful gathered to hear his speeches and contribute to his causes. He was known for his charm and eloquence, always saying the right thing, always making people feel like they were part of something bigger. He built hospitals, funded schools, and donated millions to causes that helped the less fortunate. To the public, Jonathan was a hero, the kind of man they wanted to believe in. His image was flawless. The press adored him. Investors trusted him. And his employees, while intimidated by his exacting standards, respected him. Yet, behind the public smile, Jonathan was a man trapped in a world of his own making. His personal life was far from the perfect story he presented. His divorce had been messy, his relationship with his daughter strained, and his true desires buried beneath the mask of a successful CEO. The world saw a man who had everything: money, power, admiration. But no one knew the cost of it all. No one knew the loneliness that followed him home every night. No one knew the sacrifices he'd made to get to the top. Behind the polished public image, Jonathan Cross's life was far from perfect. At home, the mansion that echoed with silence was a far cry from the bustling office he commanded each day. The wealth and success he'd amassed couldn't fill the void that stretched between him and his family. Jonathan had been divorced for 5 years now, and the end of his marriage had been anything but amicable. His ex-wife, Claire, had walked away with a hefty settlement, and while the financial terms were clear, the emotional ones never were. Jonathan's relationship with his daughter, Emily, had suffered most of all. At 16, Emily was a quiet, withdrawn teenager who saw her father more as a distant figure than a parent. Their conversations were brief, their interactions cold. Jonathan tried, he truly did, but the demands of his company often came first, leaving little room for family. The connection they once had withered away in the shadows of his career. His days were spent in constant meetings, presentations, and emails. Investors and business deals consumed him, with one eye always on the next big project, the next breakthrough. The pressure was unrelenting. His success had brought him to the top, but it had also placed him in a world where nothing seemed to be enough. The weight of expectations, both from the outside world and from within, had worn Jonathan thin. His employees looked up to him, but there was no one who truly understood the burden of being Jonathan Cross. And with each passing day, the distance between him and the people who mattered most grew wider. In the quiet moments, when he was alone in his office or at home, Jonathan wondered if it was all worth it. He had everything the world admired, but he was losing the very things that once gave him purpose. His family, his happiness, his sense of balance. They were slipping through his fingers. The pressure was building, and something was about to break. It started with a late-night project, the kind of work that brought everyone to the office, but also kept them in the shadows, where the outside world couldn't see. The atmosphere in the office was tense. Deadlines were looming, and Crosstech's latest launch was under pressure to be perfect. Sophia had been working late for weeks, her dedication showing in every report she submitted, every meeting she led. Jonathan, too, was there, alone in his office, reviewing data that seemed never-ending. The weight of the company's future pressed on his shoulders, but tonight, something felt different. Sophia had always been competent, always on top of things. But tonight, she wasn't just another employee. Jonathan noticed the way she worked. how she seemed to put everything into it, never losing focus. She was intense, her brow furrowed, her eyes scanning through endless rows of data on her screen. There was something about her drive that drew him in. Their interactions had always been brief, professional, never crossing any lines. But tonight, they found themselves working side by side, staying in the office long after everyone else had left. There was a quiet hum of tension between them, a spark neither of them had anticipated. As Jonathan leaned over her desk to discuss a particular part of the project, the air seemed to thicken. Sophia's eyes flickered up to meet his, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. It wasn't anything overt, just the kind of silent connection that happens between two people who are caught up in the same intense world. But it was enough to stir something deep inside Jonathan, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to explore in years. Sophia's intelligence and determination were like a magnet, pulling Jonathan closer, despite his attempts to keep things strictly professional. And Sophia, who had always admired Jonathan from afar, found herself drawn to his presence, to the power he exuded effortlessly. It was an attraction that neither could ignore, even if neither dared to acknowledge it. They continued to work through the night, their chemistry hanging silently in the air between every discussion and every shared glance. Both knew the boundaries, both knew the risks, but in that moment, those things didn't matter. The night ended, but something had changed. Something subtle but undeniable had sparked between them. Neither spoke of it, neither acted on it, but they both knew. This wasn't the last time they would feel it. What started as a fleeting moment of attraction soon became something neither Jonathan nor Sophia could resist. The tension between them simmered, each passing day only making it harder to ignore. They both had the world to lose, yet the pull between them grew stronger with each secret meeting, each stolen glance. At first, it was just a quiet exchange in the corner of the office late at night. A brief touch of the hand, a look that lingered a little too long. But soon, it wasn't enough to simply share a glance. They began to steal moments away from prying eyes, meeting in hidden corners of the office or at upscale restaurants far from the prying eyes of the public. Their chemistry was undeniable. Every touch, every kiss, seemed to set something ablaze. There were moments of passion, moments where nothing else existed but the two of them. Jonathan, a man who had built an empire, found himself lost in the way Sophia's touch made him feel alive, in a way he hadn't experienced in years. And Sophia, determined and ambitious, found herself caught between her professional drive and the pull of something far more dangerous. But with every stolen kiss came a wave of guilt. Jonathan knew the risks, his reputation. Everything could fall apart if anyone found out. Sophia, too, felt the weight of their secret. She had always been ambitious, but she never imagined her personal life would become so tangled with her career. They tried to keep their distance during the day, pretending to be just colleagues. But when the office was empty, when the lights dimmed and the quiet of the night settled in, they couldn't resist the draw of each other's presence. Their meetings grew more frequent, their touches more desperate. The passion between them was consuming, each encounter both thrilling and terrifying. There were moments where they both pulled back, questioning everything. Jonathan would retreat to his office, staring at the city skyline, wondering if this affair was worth the consequences. Sophia, too, would try to convince herself that it was just a temporary distraction, something that would pass. But with each passing day, it became harder to resist. They knew they were walking a dangerous line, yet neither could bring themselves to stop. It wasn't just lust, it was something deeper, something that blurred the lines between right and wrong. But in the quiet moments, when they were alone together, neither of them could deny the magnetic pull they felt. Their affair, hidden in the shadows, was about to shake everything they knew, and neither of them had any idea how far it would go. Victor Cain had always been a man who played the long game. A master of manipulation, he didn't need to force his way in, he simply found the right people and used them to his advantage. And Sophia Reed, with her ambition and drive, was the perfect target. It started innocently enough, a chance meeting at a business event, where Victor casually introduced himself as the CEO of Titan Tech. He had heard of Sophia's work at Crosstech and praised her talent in a way that made her feel seen, appreciated, something Jonathan had failed to do. Victor knew how to make people feel important, and in that moment, Sophia felt like she mattered. The kind of attention he offered was different from Jonathan's. It was warm, genuine, or at least it appeared that way. Victor's charm was his weapon, and Sophia didn't stand a chance. Over the following weeks, he found subtle ways to insert himself into her life. He started with casual conversations, always showing interest in her projects and ideas. He made her feel like a peer, a partner, even though he was, in reality, her competition. Sophia, who had never been particularly drawn to Victor's cold, calculated demeanor, found herself slowly warming to him. He listened to her in ways Jonathan hadn't for years. He made her feel important, valued, as if she could do more than just work at a desk in Jonathan's shadow. But Victor's interest wasn't just professional. He was playing a dangerous game. He knew that Sophia was close to Jonathan, trusted by him, even caught in a web of secrecy with him. Victor also knew that Jonathan's empire was built on secrecy, and if he could gain access to even the smallest piece of information, it could change the balance of power between Crosstech and Titan Tech. Victor began to weave his web carefully. He invited Sophia to dinners under the guise of business talks, always complimenting her ideas and offering his insights into the tech world. With every conversation, he planted small seeds of doubt about Jonathan, subtle hints that perhaps Jonathan's priorities were more about his image than his employees. Sophia, caught between her growing feelings for Jonathan and her desire to prove herself, was slowly drawn in. Victor made her feel as though she was the one in control, the one with the power to decide which path she wanted to take. It wasn't long before she started sharing more with him than she should have. The cracks in her loyalty began to show, and she didn't even realize it. Victor knew how to use her doubts, her insecurities, to his advantage. He was patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His goal was simple: take down Jonathan from the inside, and Sophia was his key to making that happen. What Victor didn't count on was the growing complexity of his feelings for Sophia. Beneath his calculated exterior, he found himself drawn to her ambition, her fire. It made him more determined than ever to win her over. But the more he pushed, the more he realized that the lines between business and personal were starting to blur. And he wasn't sure where the manipulation ended and something real began. But for now, he played his part well, knowing that every piece of information Sophia shared could bring him one step closer to taking Jonathan down. Sophia stood at a crossroads, torn between two men and two futures. Jonathan, her boss and secret lover, had given her a chance when no one else would. Their chemistry was undeniable, and she felt a deep, unspoken connection. Yet Jonathan's world was complicated, his focus often elsewhere, leaving her questioning if passion alone was enough. Victor, in contrast, was cold and calculated, but offered her what she craved: recognition, career advancement, and respect. He understood her ambition in ways Jonathan never had, promising her not just a job, but a partnership, a future where she could truly thrive. With Victor, success and power felt within reach, but the cost was her loyalty and trust. Sophia's nights were sleepless, consumed by the choice. Jonathan stirred her heart, but Victor promised tangible rewards. The pull of both worlds left her trapped in indecision, knowing she couldn't maintain the balance forever. Sophia was torn between the man who had made her feel alive and the man who promised her the world. And with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. Jonathan wasn't the type to overlook things. He had built his empire on being vigilant, on noticing details others missed. And lately, something about Sophia's behavior had started to gnaw at him. It began with the small things, her absence in the office at odd hours, the way she'd suddenly become more secretive, her interactions with Victor Cain. At first, Jonathan dismissed it as nothing more than a coincidence. But over time, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He had always trusted Sophia. She was one of his brightest employees, after all. But the spark between them, the hidden moments they shared, had made him more attuned to her actions, more aware of the changes in her behavior. He'd seen the way Victor had started to show more interest in her, the way he lingered just a little too long whenever they crossed paths at industry events. Jonathan knew Victor. He knew how manipulative he could be, how hungry for power and influence he was, and as much as he hated to admit it, he couldn't help but wonder if Victor had been playing a game all along. But what bothered him most wasn't the business rivalry. It was the possibility that Victor might be trying to steal more than just his company. Late one evening, Jonathan found himself standing in the doorway of the conference room, watching as Sophia and Victor spoke in hushed tones. Their conversation seemed innocent enough, but Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between them. Something hidden. Something that made his stomach twist in a way he couldn't explain. The following day, Jonathan called Sophia into his office. There was no warmth in his voice, no casual greeting. He wasn't angry, not yet, but the cold edge of suspicion lingered between them. He sat behind his desk, his eyes fixed on her, waiting for the truth to spill out, though he wasn't sure what truth he was looking for. "Are you getting too close to Victor?" Jonathan's voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tension. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this confrontation, but it didn't make it any easier to face. She tried to keep her composure, tried to smile as if the question was just a passing concern. But she could see the doubt in Jonathan's eyes, the suspicion that had begun to grow. She hesitated, caught between the desire to protect her secret and the guilt that tugged at her conscience. Jonathan's gaze was intense, like he could see through her, to everything she had been hiding. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words stuck. She couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. "It's just business, Jonathan," Sophia finally said, her voice a little too smooth, a little too rehearsed. "We're just talking about a potential collaboration." Jonathan leaned back, studying her with skepticism and a deeper, sharper pain. The tension in the room was palpable, pressing in on them. Something wasn't right. Her rehearsed words, her averted gaze, it all felt off. "You're getting too close to him," Jonathan said, his voice taut. "Victor Cain isn't someone you should trust. I know him, Sophia. He's dangerous." Sophia's heart pounded. She hadn't expected this confrontation or how easily Jonathan saw through her. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until she broke it, frustration in her voice. You're overthinking this. I can handle myself. I know what I'm doing. But Jonathan's doubt deepened. You don't think he's playing you? Using you to get to me? The words stung, sharper than she'd anticipated. She wanted to deny it, to reassure him, but couldn't, because deep down, she knew he was right. Victor had been using her, and she'd let it happen. The confrontation left their relationship fractured, trust replaced by suspicion. Sophia felt trapped, the lines between her personal life and professional ambitions blurring. Every choice seemed to ripple through both, leaving her unmoored. Victor had never cared for her. She was a pawn, a tool in his pursuit of power. And she'd played along, thinking she was in control. Now, as Jonathan's haunted gaze lingered in her mind, Sophia knew the facade couldn't hold much longer. Everything was about to change. Forever. But it wasn't just Victor. It was Jonathan, too. The attraction, the secret affair. They had started something that was quickly spiraling out of control. Sophia had always been careful, always been the one to keep her focus on her career. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. At night, alone, Sophia felt the weight of her choices. Lying in bed, she thought about Jonathan, Victor, and what she had become. Her secret affair with Jonathan had started to feel like a burden, while Victor's promises of power and respect enticed her, making her feel destined for more. Her ambitions had always driven her, but now she wondered if they were worth the cost. Entangled with Victor, she feared that his path might require sacrifices she wasn't willing to make. She didn't want to lose Jonathan, but could she turn down Victor's opportunity? Caught between two worlds, Sophia struggled to choose, her guilt and confusion consuming her. Her professional life was about to collide with her personal one, and she wasn't sure she could survive the fallout. Would she risk everything for a career or for something real? She had built her identity on ambition, but now it felt hollow. Each step forward pulled her further from who she was. As her worlds collided, the fear of losing both her career and Jonathan grew. She needed to make a choice, but it seemed impossible. Victor, understanding the game of control, saw the tension between him and Jonathan grow. He was ready to strike, knowing that Sophia had unknowingly become his pawn in a corporate war that was about to explode. It started with a leak, an anonymous tip to a journalist with a reputation for digging deep into the dark underbelly of Silicon Valley. The story, when it hit the headlines, was a bombshell. Cross-Tech CEO Jonathan Cross under investigation for corporate malfeasance and fraudulent practices. The words flashed across every major news outlet, the headline like a dagger aimed at the heart of Jonathan's carefully crafted empire. The article was damning. It detailed a series of alleged financial missteps, shady dealings, and secretive transactions that painted Jonathan in the worst possible light. The accusations were broad, hinting at everything from insider trading to mismanagement of investor funds. What made the story even more damaging was the suggestion that Crosstech's recent product launches, products that had been hailed as revolutionary, had been built on lies, on the manipulation of data. Sophia, who had been in the office when the story broke, was stunned. The newsroom was abuzz with chatter, and the usual hum of productivity came to a halt. People gathered around screens, reading the story over and over again. She stood frozen, the weight of the situation slowly settling in. She knew she couldn't be the one to blame, but a part of her, deep down, wondered how much her secret dealings with Victor had played into this. As the story spread, the fallout was immediate. Stocks in Crosstech plummeted, and the public's trust in the company began to erode. Investors pulled back, shaking the company's financial stability. The press, smelling blood in the water, piled on with every new revelation. The once revered CEO, Jonathan Cross, was now the subject of scorn, his reputation tarnished in a way that might never fully recover. Jonathan, blindsided by the leak, was in damage control mode. He immediately called a press conference, trying to control the narrative, to deny the allegations, but the damage had already been done. Every word he spoke seemed to fall flat, and the reporters didn't give him a chance to defend himself. They pressed harder, demanding answers, demanding proof. His authority, once absolute, was now being questioned by everyone, from the media to his board of directors. In the midst of the storm, Victor watched from the sidelines, a calm smile playing on his lips. He had orchestrated this perfectly. The information he had leaked wasn't just an attack. It was a calculated strike designed to take Jonathan down and weaken his company from within. It had all been part of his plan. And now, with Jonathan scrambling to salvage what was left of his company, Victor's own company, Titan Tech, stood poised to swoop in and take advantage of the chaos. Victor had won the first battle, but he knew that this war wasn't over yet. And as the days passed, he couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction in seeing Jonathan's empire crumbling. Sophia, meanwhile, was torn between fear and guilt. She hadn't known this would happen. She hadn't known that the information she had shared with Victor, the innocent-sounding business conversations, the moments when she had trusted him, would lead to this. She had thought she was just helping him understand Crosstech better, just showing him what could be improved. She never imagined it would become the weapon that brought Jonathan's world to its knees. But as the truth began to settle in, she realized that Victor had played her all along. He had used her, manipulated her, and now there was no turning back. Her loyalty to Jonathan, her connection with him, felt like a distant memory in the wake of the crisis. The storm that Victor had unleashed was far from over. The fallout from the leak would continue to ripple through Crosstech and the tech world for weeks to come. But for Jonathan, the question wasn't just how to save his company. It was how to reclaim control of his life, his relationships, and his very sense of self. The price of betrayal, whether from Victor or from those he trusted most, was becoming clearer with every passing hour. And for Sophia, the moment of reckoning was fast approaching. She had stood on the edge of two worlds, but now she would have to face the consequences of her choices. Would she align herself with Victor, the man who had brought the storm? Or would she find a way to make things right with Jonathan, the man she had once trusted, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had gained? The game had shifted, and everyone involved was about to feel the consequences. The atmosphere in Jonathan's office was thick with tension. The air felt heavy, as if the storm that had been brewing between him and Sophia had finally reached its breaking point. The walls that had once seemed like a safe place for their secret had now become the arena for a confrontation neither of them was prepared for. Jonathan had spent the entire night going over the details, the leaked information, the connections, the way everything seemed to tie back to Victor. He couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia had been more involved in the attack on his company than she had let on. The trust he had placed in her felt like a lie, and the betrayal cut deeper than he had expected. He hadn't slept. The story in the media was only getting worse, and every attempt he made to control the damage only seemed to make it worse. But it wasn't just the company that was at stake anymore. It was everything. His life, his reputation, and most painfully, his relationship with Sophia. The door to his office opened, and Sophia stepped inside. She had a look on her face that Jonathan couldn't read. Tired, worried, but with something else in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? He couldn't tell. But what he did know was that he couldn't stay silent anymore. The questions had been burning inside of him, eating away at his every thought. And now, he was done with pretending. "Sophia," he began, his voice low but firm. He didn't wait for her to respond. "I need you to be honest with me. What happened? Were you part of this?" Sophia froze, the color draining from her face, as Jonathan's words hit her like a slap. She had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. "I didn't," she began, but the words faltered. Guilt and shame burned in her chest as she faced Jonathan's accusing gaze. His eyes, once full of trust, now blazed with hurt and anger. "You didn't?" he shot back. "Then explain the meetings with Victor, the lies. You saw what was happening to the company, and you let it happen. You were part of this. You let him use you." His voice rose, sharp with emotion, his hands clenched into fists. Sophia's stomach churned. She had known the truth deep down, but hearing it from Jonathan shattered her. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you." But Jonathan wasn't listening. His pain deepened, the distance between them widening. "You should have told me," he said. "Instead, you let Victor in and tore everything apart. Us apart." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "I didn't want to choose," she said, her voice trembling. "Victor made me believe I was more than just your employee. She stopped, biting her lip, but it was too late. "You should have trusted me," Jonathan said, his voice breaking. "We could have figured it out. But you betrayed me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Neither of them spoke. It felt as if every word, every emotion, had been spent. Jonathan's face was hard, his gaze cold and distant, while Sophia stood there, feeling the weight of her decisions crash down on her. She had never meant for any of this to happen. She had never thought it would come to this. Her relationship with Jonathan, the man she had grown to care for, unraveling before her eyes. But now, standing in front of him, the truth was undeniable. She had crossed a line she couldn't take back. Jonathan shook his head slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Sophia. I don't know if I can trust you again." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had no answers for him, no way to fix what was broken. She had ruined everything. And just like that, the connection they had shared, built on trust, passion, and ambition, began to unravel, piece by piece. It wasn't just a betrayal of business anymore. It was a betrayal of everything they had built together. And as the distance between them grew, so did the realization that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Sophia's world had already been turned upside down, but what she was about to uncover would shatter everything she thought she knew. After the confrontation with Jonathan, she had retreated into herself, trying to make sense of the mess she had created. But as the days passed, a gnawing feeling of unease began to settle in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Victor's actions, something she hadn't fully understood. The trust she had placed in him, the promises of power, of career advancement, now seemed like empty words, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Victor's behavior, his manipulation, everything had been too calculated, too perfect. She had been so blinded by ambition that she hadn't seen the truth. But now, the fog was lifting. It started with a phone call, a meeting Victor had requested, one he said was important for the next steps in their partnership. But as she entered the dimly lit conference room, Something felt off. The room was too quiet, the air too thick with unspoken tension. Victor stood at the far end of the room, his usual confident smile now replaced with a look of cold calculation. He greeted her with a nod, but it was the look in his eyes that made her pause. This wasn't the man who had charmed her, who had made her feel like she was part of something bigger. No, this was someone different. A man with an agenda. And she was beginning to realize she had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. "Sit down, Sophia. We need to talk," Victor said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. She took a seat, the unease growing inside her. She had already begun to piece together what had happened. The way Victor had pushed her, the way he had whispered promises in her ear while pulling her further into his web. But what she hadn't realized was how much of a pawn she had truly been. Victor began speaking, detailing plans for their next steps, talking about taking down Jonathan once and for all, about eliminating the competition. But as he spoke, Sophia's heart began to sink. It was all starting to make sense. The leak, the information that had brought Jonathan's company to its knees, the way he had made her feel like she was the one in control. Victor had never cared about her. He had never cared about her dreams, her career, or her future. He had used her, manipulated her every move to weaken Jonathan, to take down Crosstech. She had been nothing more than a tool, a distraction to get closer to Jonathan's inner circle, to gather intel, to cause chaos. And the worst part? She had been so caught up in her own ambition, so desperate for validation, that she had willingly played along. "I've always known you had the potential to be more than just an employee, Sophia," Victor continued, oblivious to the storm building in her mind. "With my help, you could have everything. Everything you've ever wanted. Together, we'll take control of this industry." But in that moment, as his words hung in the air, Sophia saw him for who he truly was. Nothing more than a predator, using people like pawns in a game for power. She had believed in him, in his promises, but the truth hit her with the force of a freight train. Everything he had said, everything he had done, was part of a larger plan to bring down Jonathan and seize control of the tech world for himself. She was just a means to an end. She stood up abruptly, her mind racing. "You've been using me," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Victor's expression didn't change. He simply raised an eyebrow, as if surprised she hadn't figured it out sooner. "I'm not using you, Sophia. I'm giving you what you want. All you had to do was follow my lead." But that was the moment it all clicked. She had been nothing more than a pawn, a piece on a chessboard that Victor had manipulated to weaken Jonathan and his company. And now that the game was reaching its final stages, Sophia realized just how much she had lost. "What about Jonathan?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. "What happens to him?" Victor's smile grew wider, but there was no warmth in it. "Jonathan? He's just another obstacle in the way of our success. Once Crosstech is out of the picture, we'll be unstoppable. The world will be ours, Sophia." The words stung like a slap to the face. She had thought Victor cared about her. She had thought he saw her as an equal, as someone who deserved more. But now, she realized that everything had been a lie. He had never seen her as more than a tool to advance his own agenda. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She felt sick to her stomach, the weight of her own choices pressing down on her. How had she not seen it before? How had she let herself be so easily manipulated? Sophia's voice trembled as the truth hit her. "Everything we talked about, it was all just to get at Jonathan, wasn't it?" Victor didn't flinch. It's business, Sophia. Nothing personal. Something snapped within her. She had been naive, but she wouldn't let Victor control her anymore. Her voice steadied. I'm not your pawn, and I'm done playing your game. Victor's smile faltered. You'll regret this. You can't walk away now. But Sophia wasn't listening. She had been used, but now she would reclaim her life. Leaving Victor's office, her mind raced. She had to warn Jonathan about Victor's scheme, even if earning his trust again seemed impossible. At Jonathan's penthouse, the weight of her betrayal loomed heavy. When she entered, he stood by the window, a shadow of his former self, waiting, for answers perhaps, or for the truth that might change everything. Sophia, he said quietly, not turning to face her. His voice carried a coldness that stung. What do you want? She swallowed hard, stepping forward. I need to talk to you, Jonathan. Please, just listen to me. He didn't move, his silence speaking volumes. There was a distance between them now, a gulf that seemed impossible to cross. She had betrayed him in ways he couldn't even process, and here she was, asking for a chance to explain herself. I know I've hurt you, Sophia began, her voice shaking. I know I've made mistakes, and I can never take them back, but I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because I need to tell you the truth. Victor has been using me. He's been manipulating me the whole time. He never cared about me. He only wanted to bring you down. Jonathan finally turned to face her. His eyes narrowed, the skepticism clear in his gaze. And why should I believe you now, Sophia? After everything you've done? The harshness in his voice hit her like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stand tall. She couldn't expect forgiveness, but she had to try. Because I've seen it now, Jonathan. I've seen what Victor's been doing behind the scenes, how he's been playing both of us. He wants to destroy Crosstech. He's been using me to gather information, to weaken you, to make sure Titan Tech comes out on top. You're not the one he's after, Jonathan. It's your company. It's everything you've built. Jonathan's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes darkened, the weight of her words sinking in. The cold veneer he had put on was beginning to crack. Sophia could see it in his posture, the way his fists tightened at his sides. She knew she had to be convincing. This might be the only chance she would get. Why should I trust you? He asked, his voice rough. You've lied to me. You've been with him, helping him tear my world apart. Do you know what this has done to me? To my company? To everything I've worked for? Sophia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I didn't realize what was happening at first, but I do now, and I'm trying to stop it. I'm here to warn you, Jonathan, before it's too late, before he destroys everything. But I need your help. I need you to trust me. Just this once. Jonathan stepped forward, his expression softening slightly, but the anger and hurt were still there, lingering in his eyes. You've made your choices, Sophia, and now I have to live with the consequences. She could feel the weight of his words crashing down on her, but she didn't back away. She stepped closer, trying to bridge the distance between them, trying to show him that she was sincere. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I'm asking for a chance to fix this, to help you stop Victor. He's been playing us both, Jonathan, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. I want to help you, not him. For a long moment, Jonathan said nothing. His eyes searched hers as if trying to read her, to figure out if there was any truth in her words. He looked as though he was weighing something heavy, the trust he once had in her seemingly gone, replaced by doubt and uncertainty. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter this time. "Even if I wanted to believe you, Sophia, how do I know you're not still working for him? How do I know you won't turn on me again, just like you did before?" Sophia's heart twisted in her chest, the reality of his distrust settling over her like a shroud. She had no answers, no guarantees. All she had was the truth, and a desperate hope that he could see it. "I can't change what's happened, but I can show you I'm not the same person I was. I can help you, Jonathan. I can help us both take him down." Jonathan stared at her for a long time, his mind working through the possibilities. He wanted to believe her, but the wounds were too deep and the damage too great. Sophia had betrayed him, and trust wasn't something that could be fixed with just a few words. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Sophia. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can let you back in after everything you've done." Sophia stood there, her heart breaking as she realized how much she had lost, how much she might never regain. But despite the uncertainty in his voice, despite the pain in his eyes, there was a glimmer of something else there, something that made her believe she hadn't completely lost him yet. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just give me a chance." Jonathan didn't respond. He simply turned back toward the window, staring out over the city skyline, lost in thought. Sophia remained standing there, unsure of what would come next, but determined to find a way to make things right. The battle ahead was far from over, and the road to redemption would be long and difficult. But for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she had a chance to fix what she had broken, even if it was just a sliver of hope. The tension in the air was palpable as Jonathan Cross strode into the boardroom, his sharp, calculating eyes sweeping over the long table. Across from him sat Victor Cain, the man who had been orchestrating the fall of his empire from the shadows. The moment had come, the moment where everything would be decided. No more games, no more manipulation. It was time for a confrontation. The room was filled with top executives from both Crosstech and Titantech, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The stakes had never been higher, and this battle would determine the fate of their companies, the future of their careers. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding, his posture firm. Victor, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair with an air of smug confidence, as if he had already won. For months, Victor had been the shadow in Jonathan's life, quietly pulling strings, whispering in the ears of employees, leaking damaging information about Crosstech. But now, Jonathan was here to expose him for what he truly was: a threat, a destroyer of everything Jonathan had worked for. The doors to the boardroom shut with a soft click, and for a moment, everything went silent. The board members exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what would happen next. Jonathan's gaze never wavered from Victor as he took his seat at the table. Victor, seemingly unfazed, finally broke the silence with a slow clap. His voice was smooth, almost mocking. "Well, Jonathan," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "I must admit, I didn't think you had it in you to face me. But here you are, at the end of this long, drawn-out game. I must say, I'm impressed." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his voice cold as he spoke. "This isn't a game, Victor. This is my life. This is everything I've built, and you've spent months trying to tear it all down." Victor smirked, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "You make it sound so personal, Jonathan, but it's business. It's always been business. I'm just doing what any competent businessman would do. Taking advantage of weaknesses, exploiting opportunities." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice low but dangerous. "You're not a businessman. You're a thief. You've been using people, manipulating them to do your bidding. You've used Sophia. You've used my own company's weaknesses against me." Victor's expression faltered for just a moment, but then his mask returned, and he straightened in his chair, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Sophia was a means to an end, Jonathan. And as for your company, well, let's just say I've never been a fan of competition. But you can't blame me for playing the game better than you." Jonathan's fists clenched, his anger rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He needed to expose Victor, to make him understand that no matter how far Victor had gone, Jonathan was still in control of his own fate. "Let's stop pretending, Victor," Jonathan said, his voice ice-cold. "We both know you've been behind the leaks. You've been leaking confidential information, sabotaging deals, causing chaos within Crosstech. You've been working with employees who are loyal to you, undermining me at every turn. And now, it's all coming to light." Victor raised an eyebrow, but didn't flinch. "And what are you going to do about it, Jonathan? You can't prove any of it. You've got nothing." Jonathan's eyes flickered to the screen behind him. With a swift motion, he pressed a button on the table, and a series of documents and images appeared on the large display. They were emails, leaked files, and internal communications that clearly linked Victor's company to the sabotage efforts within Crosstech. The board members gasped, their eyes widening as they saw the evidence laid out before them. Victor's face, which had once been confident, now betrayed a flicker of concern. He straightened, his previous calm demeanor beginning to crack. "This is just the beginning," Jonathan continued, his voice steady, his eyes locked onto Victor's. "We've been tracking every move, every email, every deal you've made behind the scenes. And we've got it all. Crosstech will survive this, Victor, but TitanTech won't. Not after this." Victor's smirk faded into a tight-lipped expression of frustration. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can expose me and walk away unscathed. But you're wrong, Jonathan. You've always underestimated me." Silence followed, tension thick in the room. Victor rose slowly, his anger barely contained. "I built TitanTech from the ground up, and I won't let you destroy it. Not now. Not ever." Jonathan didn't flinch. "You built it on lies, Victor. And now it's all collapsing." For a moment, it seemed they might come to blows, but Victor stepped back, his expression darkening as the undeniable evidence sank in. His voice dropped to a growl. "You think you've won? Fine. But this isn't over. You'll regret this." Jonathan stood firm. "It's already over, Victor. You've lost." The room fell silent as Victor's anger twisted his face, but there was nothing left for him to do. He turned sharply and stormed out, his footsteps echoing. Jonathan remained at the head of the table, steady and resolute. The board applauded his victory, but Jonathan knew the real battle was just beginning. Legal fights, public fallout, and the challenge of restoring Crosstech lay ahead. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt in control. As the dust began to settle, a new figure, Sophia Reed, stepped into the light, shifting the game once more. The woman who had once been the source of Jonathan's heartbreak, the one who had betrayed him, was now the one who would decide whether he could reclaim his empire or watch it crumble to the ground. It was a quiet morning when Sophia walked into the boardroom, her steps purposeful, her expression one of determination. The board members, still shaken by the recent revelations, were already gathered, whispering among themselves. They had just witnessed a dramatic confrontation between the two tech giants, Jonathan and Victor, but something in the air told them the story wasn't over. Sophia's arrival silenced the room. All eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a manila folder to her chest. Jonathan glanced at her, a mixture of surprise and confusion crossing his face. She had been the one to help destroy his trust, to betray him in ways he couldn't have imagined. Yet here she was, back in the same room. Sophia locked eyes with Jonathan, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent the last few days gathering everything she could, painstakingly combing through documents, emails, and messages to find the truth that would clear Jonathan's name and expose Victor for the manipulative, power-hungry man he truly was. But as she approached the table, Sophia hesitated for just a moment. She had made so many mistakes. She had betrayed Jonathan's trust, and she knew the weight of the consequences. But this wasn't about her anymore. This was about stopping Victor, about saving the company that Jonathan had worked so hard to build. Sophia placed the folder on the table, her steady voice cutting through the tense room. "I have evidence that changes everything," she announced, locking eyes with the board members. "Victor Cain was behind the sabotage of Crosstech, and I'm going to prove it." Gasps rippled through the room. Moments ago, the board had watched Jonathan and Victor clash, but no one expected this revelation. Sophia, once at the center of the scandal, was now exposing its mastermind. Jonathan rose, disbelief etched on his face. "Sophia, what are you doing?" She met his gaze unwaveringly. "What I should have done, long ago." Opening the folder, Sophia revealed damning documents, emails, messages, and financial records. She began to read. Victor Cain approved the transfer of classified financial information to TitanTech. He orchestrated data leaks that caused the stock drop. And here, she hesitated briefly before continuing, is an email where he admits using me to gather intel from Crosstech. He played us all. The board members exchanged stunned glances as Victor, standing by the window, turned to face them. His expression darkened with fury. "Lies!" he hissed. "A desperate attempt to destroy me." Sophia stood firm. "It's the truth, Victor. Everyone can see it now. You manipulated and used us all, but it ends here." Victor's eyes narrowed, calculating his next move. "You think this will help you, Sophia? You'll regret this." "I'm not doing this for myself," she replied calmly. "I owe Jonathan the truth, and the chance to fight back against what you've done." There was a long silence as the board members absorbed the gravity of the situation. They had watched the drama unfold, seen the chaos Victor had caused, but now they were faced with undeniable evidence. It was clear that Victor had been the architect of Crosstech's downfall, not Jonathan. The room began to stir with murmurs of disbelief, and slowly the tide began to turn. Jonathan, still in shock, looked at Sophia with a mixture of emotions: surprise, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite name. It was as if the final puzzle piece had fallen into place, and suddenly everything made sense. Jonathan began, his voice breaking for the first time. "Sophia, I don't know what to say. I never thought you'd... After everything." Sophia met his gaze, her eyes filled with remorse, but also with determination. "I can't undo the past, Jonathan. I can't change what I did. But I can do this. I can help you stop him." The tension in the boardroom was palpable until, one by one, the members began to speak. Hesitant at first, they soon rallied behind Jonathan as Victor's manipulation came to light. The balance of power shifted swiftly. Victor Cain's lies unraveled, clearing Jonathan's name. Sophia's bold stand helped Jonathan reclaim his company and his future. Victor, exposed and furious, stormed out in defeat, his empire crumbling around him. Titan Tech's reputation plummeted as investors, customers, and allies abandoned him. The media uncovered his deceit, and his golden boy image shattered. In his dim office, Victor sat alone, his empire in ruins and his reputation destroyed. Yet, amidst the wreckage, one thing remained: his burning desire for revenge. His fingers drummed steadily on the desk as he plotted his next move. He had lost the battle, but the war was far from over. Victor knew he couldn't take down Jonathan Cross in a direct confrontation. Not now, not when CrossTech had come out victorious. But there were other ways to strike back. Ways that didn't involve the spotlight. Ways that were far more insidious. "Jonathan Cross thinks he's won," Victor muttered to himself, his voice a low growl. "But I'll make sure he regrets it. I'll make sure they all do." The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. His right-hand man, Ethan, entered the room, his face tight with concern. "Victor, the board's meeting in 20 minutes. They want answers. We can't keep hiding from this." Victor's lips curled into a tight, almost imperceptible smile. "I know," he replied, "and I'm going to give them answers, just not the ones they expect." Ethan frowned, uncertain. "What do you mean?" Victor's gaze turned cold, calculating. "We're not finished yet. I've got some ideas. We'll regroup, rebuild, and then we'll go after CrossTech. I'll make sure Jonathan Cross regrets ever crossing me." Ethan hesitated. "But what about Sophia? She was the one who exposed you. She's on their side now. How do you deal with her?" Victor's eyes glinted with a dangerous resolve. "Sophia is a minor player. I've already dealt with her. But Jonathan—" His voice grew sharper. "Jonathan Cross is the real target. He thinks he's safe. He thinks he's won. But I'll show him that nothing is over until I say it's over." As Victor left the office, the air around him seemed to crackle with his fury. His company may have been in ruins, but his mind was already racing, plotting his next move. He had lost the battle, but the war was far from finished. Victor knew that revenge wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it took time, strategy, and patience. And he had plenty of that. He had always been a step ahead of everyone, and this time wouldn't be any different. Back at CrossTech, Jonathan was riding high on his victory. The legal battles were ongoing, but with Sophia's help, they had managed to expose Victor's true intentions. For the first time in what felt like ages, Jonathan could breathe easy. Titan Tech was on the brink of collapse, and his empire was once again secure. But little did he know, Victor was already working in the shadows. And this time, he wasn't going to make the same mistake. He wouldn't make his move until he knew he had the upper hand. Victor's empire may have crumbled, but his desire for revenge had only grown stronger. He was like a wounded animal, driven by rage and the need to reclaim his lost power. And though he had been exposed, he was far from finished. He would rebuild. He would strike when least expected. And when he did, Jonathan Cross would have no idea what hit him. Victor Cain's vow for revenge had just begun, and the storm he was about to unleash would be unlike anything they had ever seen. After the storm of betrayal, the dust had finally begun to settle. The boardrooms were quieter. The courtroom drama had reached its peak, and the fate of Jonathan Cross and his company seemed secure once more. But amidst all the chaos, one thing remained unresolved: the future between Jonathan and Sophia. In the days following Victor's downfall, they had avoided each other, their interactions strained, their silence louder than any words they could exchange. But now, with the weight of everything that had happened between them, a moment of reckoning was inevitable. Jonathan sat in his office, staring out the window, the city lights below him flickering like distant stars. His mind was tired, weighed down by the decisions, the betrayals, and the constant battle for control. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Sophia. She had helped him, no question about it. She had exposed the truth, stood by his side when no one else had, and proved herself in ways he never imagined. Yet, despite all of that, the damage had been done. Trust, once broken, was not so easily mended. The door to his office creaked open, and Jonathan turned to find Sophia standing there. She looked different, older, perhaps, or maybe just weary from everything that had happened. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. There was too much to say, too much hurt, too much uncertainty. Sophia cleared her throat, stepping further into the room. "Jonathan," she began softly, "can we talk?" Jonathan nodded, gesturing for her to sit. The tension between them was palpable, but he wasn't sure how to break it. They had been through so much, but he still didn't know what they were, what they could be. Sophia took a seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hesitated before speaking again. "I owe you an apology, Jonathan, for everything, for what happened with Victor, for the lies, for the hurt I caused. I can't take back what I did, but I hope you can understand that I was trying to make things right." Jonathan's gaze softened, though the pain still lingered in his eyes. "I don't know if I can understand, Sophia. Everything felt so fake. All this time, I thought we had something real. And then, you were with him. You were helping him. You—" He paused, struggling to find the words. "You broke my trust, and that's not something I can just forget." Sophia's face flushed with guilt. She knew he was right, that nothing she said could erase what had happened. But still, she couldn't help but explain. "I wasn't thinking straight. I let myself get caught up in everything, in the power, the promises Victor made. I thought I could do something that would help both of us. But in the end, I only made things worse. I hurt you, and I'm sorry." There was a long silence between them. Jonathan looked down at his hands, the weight of her words settling in. He wanted to feel anger, to push her away for good, but instead he felt a deep sadness. He had trusted her, and she had betrayed him. But there was a part of him, a small part, that still wondered if they could find a way to heal. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, Jonathan, but I want to try. I want to prove that I can be the person you thought I was. I don't want to lose you. If there's any part of you that can still see me as someone worth fighting for." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He wasn't sure what he was feeling: anger, betrayal, confusion, but one thing was certain. Sophia's presence had always meant something to him. Even after everything, there was a flicker of something. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Sophia," Jonathan said, his voice raw. "You've hurt me in ways I never thought possible. and part of me wonders if you're just going to hurt me again." Sophia nodded, understanding the depth of his hesitation. "I get it," she whispered. "But what I did, what happened with Victor, none of it was ever about you. It was about me being selfish, about me thinking I could fix everything without realizing the damage I was causing. I've lost a lot because of that. But I'm here now, Jonathan. I'm not going anywhere, unless you want me to." For a long moment, Jonathan remained silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had spent so much time trying to protect his company, trying to shield himself from the chaos, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly open up. Sophia had hurt him, yes, but she had also helped him when it mattered most. She had proven her loyalty when everything else seemed lost. And in the quiet of that room, Jonathan realized that perhaps the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the possibility of forgiveness. Jonathan looked up at Sophia, his expression softening. "I don't know what the future holds, Sophia. I don't know if we can go back to what we were. But maybe we can start over. Slowly. One step at a time." Sophia's eyes welled with emotion, and she nodded, the weight lifting slightly from her shoulders. "I'm willing to take that chance, Jonathan. I just need you to know that I'm here, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove I'm not the person I was." The silence between them wasn't filled with certainty, but it was filled with something else. Hope. The future, uncertain as it was, no longer seemed impossible. Jonathan wasn't sure where this path would lead them, but for the first time in a long while, he was willing to walk it with her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin anew. But as they sat there, the world outside their window continued to turn, and neither of them could ignore the reality that Victor's shadow still loomed large. Their future, together or apart, was still uncertain. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And that was a place to start. The aftermath of the battle with Victor Cain was far from over. But as the days turned into weeks, Jonathan Cross found himself at a crossroads, not just in his career, but in his personal life. The weight of the past had finally begun to lift, and now it was time for him to rebuild. Not just his company, but his relationships as well. Jonathan had spent years consumed by his work, his obsession with success driving him further and further away from the things that truly mattered. His marriage had crumbled, and his relationship with his daughter Claire had all but dissolved. But now, with everything that had happened, Jonathan was beginning to realize just how much he had lost in the pursuit of power. As he sat in his office, going over the latest financial reports, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest, the longing for connection, for something more than just numbers and profits. He had rebuilt Crosstech once, and now it was time to rebuild his life. Jonathan picked up his phone, staring at the contact list. His fingers hovered over Claire's name. It had been months since they had spoken. Too many months. He had promised himself he would fix things, but every time he tried, something else came up. The company needed him. The investors were breathing down his neck. And before he knew it, the phone calls went unanswered. The texts left unread. But now, with the dust from Victor's downfall settling, Jonathan knew it was time to make amends. He needed to be there for his daughter. He needed to show her that, despite everything, he hadn't given up on her. With a deep breath, Jonathan tapped the screen and pressed the call button. His heart raced in his chest as he waited for the dial tone to fade. Claire picked up after a few rings, her voice tentative. Dad! Jonathan's heart softened at the sound of her voice. It had been too long. Hey, Claire. It's me. There was a pause on the other end. I didn't expect to hear from you. What's going on? Jonathan bit his lip, searching for the right words. I know it's been a while, a long while, and I know I've been absent, but I want to make things right. I miss you, Claire. There was a long silence, and Jonathan could almost hear the wheels turning in Claire's mind. She was hurt, and rightfully so. He had let her down, just as he had let so many people down. But he was determined to fix it. Finally, Claire spoke. It's not that easy, Dad. You can't just come back and expect everything to be fine. Jonathan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I know it's not that simple. But I'm here now, and I want to try. I want to be a part of your life again. There was another pause before Claire sighed. All right, Dad. But it's going to take time. You can't just fix everything overnight. Jonathan smiled softly, relief washing over him. I don't expect that, but I'll take whatever time you're willing to give me. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jonathan felt a glimmer of hope. His relationship with Claire was far from healed, but it was a start. And that was all he needed. One small step in the right direction. As he hung up the phone, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, a mix of exhaustion and hope in his chest. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to walk it. Not just for his company, but for his daughter, for the relationships he had neglected, and for the future he was determined to rebuild. Meanwhile, at CrossTech, the company was slowly recovering. Jonathan had made changes, implemented new strategies, and focused on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered during the chaos. It wasn't just about profits anymore. It was about making sure the company stood for something more, something that would resonate with the people who had supported him through it all. Sophia, too, had played a part in the company's revival. She had proven herself once again, not just as a talented employee, but as someone who was willing to fight for what was right. Though the scars of their past were still there, they had found a way to work together. Slowly, but surely, they were rebuilding, both the company and their fractured trust. As the days passed, Jonathan began to see a shift within himself. The obsession with power, the need to prove himself. Those things no longer held the same weight. What mattered now was the people around him, the ones he had neglected for so long. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he was willing to put in the work. Jonathan had learned the hard way that success without meaning was hollow. Now, as he looked toward the future, he understood that true fulfillment didn't come from building an empire. It came from rebuilding the relationships that truly mattered. And so, with each passing day, he continued to rebuild his company, reconnect with his daughter, and rediscover the value of the people he held dear. The road ahead would be uncertain, but Jonathan knew one thing for sure. This time, he wasn't going to lose himself in the process. Sophia Reed had spent much of her career tethered to two powerful men, Jonathan Cross, CEO of CrossTech, and Victor Cain, a rival tech mogul whose ambition had pulled her into a dangerous game. Now, with both men out of her life, she stood at a crossroads. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would no longer be defined by her past mistakes. In the aftermath of Victor's downfall and Jonathan's rebuilding, Sophia resolved to carve her own path, independently and without the baggage of her past. With her talent for technology, sharp business acumen, and unyielding ambition, she was ready to prove herself. She spent countless hours researching her next move. Despite the challenges women faced in the tech industry, Sophia's determination only grew. She began networking, pitching her vision for a groundbreaking AI-focused startup, and seeking investors interested in her ideas rather than her history. The early weeks were grueling, filled with rejection and doubt, but Sophia persisted. Refining her pitch, improving her product, and assembling a team of like-minded individuals, she slowly gained momentum. Her reputation as a capable and independent entrepreneur began to grow. Eventually, a major investor took a chance on her, recognizing her drive and vision. It wasn't a massive deal, but it was the start she needed. Sophia's company began to thrive, and for the first time in years, she felt a true sense of accomplishment, earned on her terms, with no strings attached. As her business flourished, the past, late nights with Jonathan and power plays with Victor, became distant memories. Sophia Reed had transformed into a force of her own, focused on building something truly hers. Sophia still had moments where she questioned her decisions. The past wasn't easy to erase, and there were times when the weight of what she had been through threatened to pull her back. She had lost friends, made enemies, and hurt the people she cared about. But she refused to let that define her. One evening, as Sophia sat in her modest office overlooking the city, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The road had been rocky, filled with pitfalls and setbacks, but she was standing on her own 2 feet now. Her phone buzzed with a message, a reminder of a meeting with a potential new partner in the morning. She had no time to dwell on the past. She had work to do. Sophia had once been a pawn in the games of powerful men, but now she was a queen in her own right, commanding her own kingdom. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could make it on her own terms, that she didn't need to rely on anyone else to shape her future. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Sophia Reed wasn't looking back. She was carving out her own place in the world, one decision at a time. And no matter what happened, she would never let anyone dictate her worth again. For the first time in her life, Sophia wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And the best part? She had done it all on her own. Victor Cain had fallen. His empire was shattered, his reputation tarnished, and his grand plans undone by the very people he had once manipulated. Yet, even in defeat, there remained one thing that Victor had always held close: his relentless drive for power. And as the dust settled from the chaos he had caused, it became clear. Victor wasn't done yet. He was only biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jonathan Cross, now in the midst of rebuilding his company, had allowed himself to believe that the worst was behind him. He had repaired his relationship with his daughter. Sophia had proven herself as a capable partner, and the future of CrossTech seemed secure. But deep down, Jonathan knew that with men like Victor, peace was never permanent. Victor's defeat had not only cost him his career, it had crushed his pride, something he could never accept. And so, he began to plan his final move, a move that would threaten to undo everything Jonathan had worked for. It started subtly, small, seemingly insignificant things. A few encrypted emails here, a hacked server there, things that could easily be brushed off as technical glitches or coincidence. But the deeper Jonathan dug, the clearer it became. Someone was still trying to sabotage him. He had been warned that Victor might be planning something, but the suddenness of the attack still caught him off guard. It wasn't until one fateful evening, as Jonathan sat in his office going through some financial reports, that the truth began to unravel. The first sign came in the form of a call from his head of security, Carl. Jonathan, you need to see this. Carl's voice was strained, filled with an urgency that Jonathan hadn't heard in years. Jonathan stood up, his heart skipping a beat. What's happened? Carl's voice dropped lower. There's been a breach, a major one. It's Victor. Jonathan's mind raced as he grabbed his coat and headed for the security office. The feeling of dread settled over him like a heavy fog. He had hoped that Victor had finally been defeated, that he could focus on the future. But here it was again, the specter of Victor's revenge looming large. Inside the security office, the team was working frantically to assess the damage. The monitors flashed with lines of code, screens filled with data, but all Jonathan could see was the reality. Victor had found a way back in. Carl turned to him, his face pale. He's embedded himself deep. We're talking full access to our internal systems. Financials, client lists, even personal data. He's leaking it all. Jonathan's chest tightened. The leak wasn't just damaging, it was catastrophic. Sensitive client data, proprietary technology, and the most private details about the company's inner workings were now in the hands of Victor. He had always been a master of manipulation, and now he was wielding it as a weapon. The next few hours were a blur. Jonathan's security team scrambled to contain the breach, but it was clear that Victor had planned this meticulously. The damage was already done. The company's stock dropped. Rumors of internal corruption spread like wildfire, and the media was already picking up on the story. But Victor wasn't done yet. No, his final move was still to come. As the night wore on, Jonathan received an unexpected package at his office, an envelope, sealed with no return address. His heart pounded as he tore it open, knowing it was something important. Inside, there was a single, chilling note. This is just the beginning. You've made your enemies, Jonathan. And now, they will make you pay. The words were cold, calculated, and they sent a shiver down Jonathan's spine. It was Victor's final act of vengeance, one that would haunt Jonathan at every turn. Victor wasn't just attacking his company. He was attacking everything Jonathan had worked for, his reputation, his family, and his legacy. As the hours ticked away, Jonathan knew that his world had just been thrown into chaos once more. Back at Crosstech, Sophia was working late, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. "Meet me at the office. We need to talk." Sophia's stomach dropped. She could sense the urgency in his message. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. As Sophia rushed to the office, the weight of what had transpired over the past few days began to settle on her shoulders. Jonathan's world was once again in jeopardy, and now it seemed like the past was coming back to haunt them both. When Sophia arrived, Jonathan was waiting for her. His face was drawn, his eyes tired, and the tension in the air was suffocating. He didn't have to say a word. The look on his face said it all. Victor had made his move. Jonathan looked at Sophia, his voice low. "It's not over. Victor's coming for everything, and I don't know if I can stop him this time." Sophia took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had helped him before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the danger greater. Yet, despite everything, she wasn't about to back down. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice steady, even if her heart was pounding. "We always do." As Jonathan and Sophia stood there, the future uncertain, a shadow loomed over them. The shadow of Victor Cain. His last act of revenge had begun, and no one, not even Jonathan, knew how far it would go, or how it would end.